This is the day two of the 2 week online session, and here we will discuss about the next point we have for the Oracle integration. So before going to a start, I just want to recap the previous one that whatever we have discussed in the last session. So in last session we discussed about the integration to the Oracle integration, where we discuss about the all three components of OIC, and then we move to the components part where we discuss about the all the components related to the integration, whatever we are going to use for that, like adapters, agent, connection, lookup, packages, and all. Then we move to the version where we learn that what kind of version available in the for that OIC and what is the basic differences between both version 2 and the generation 3. So here you can see whenever we are saying that version of Oracle instance, so previously it was saying that version 2, version 1, something like that. But after that, they introduced generation 3. So we don't have version 3, we have generation 3. Then in last, we discuss about the patterns, how many patterns are there for Oracle integration, and what patterns is removed from generation 3, and basic details we discussed in last session. So today in the session, we will discuss about the web services, that the most important part of the Oracle integration. As most of the part we will work on the web services only, so that we can create transaction in Oracle Fusion with the help of this web services only. So we have two web services, SOAP and REST. We will discuss on that. Then we will move to the edition, OIC edition, that Oracle provided two edition, that standard and enterprise. What the differences between both and what kind of element both edition is going to provide. That basic thing we will learn about that, and then we will move to the adapters. So in previous session, we just got to know about the basic of adapter, why we are using adapters, and what kind of adapter there. So here in this video, we will just go bit deep in that, and we'll see where we will use adapter. And yes, next we will move to the roles of connection. So whenever we are going to create connections, we will have three options to select the role. So whenever we are saying that roles of connection, you can consider as a type of connection. So that can be trigger, invoke, and trigger and invoke. Why we will use that all these three, and how to identify that what kind of roles we have to choose for connection. Everything we will learn here. And again, after that, all these things, we will move to the connection creation part where we will create one or two basic connections so that we can use the same connection while creating the integration. So yes, before end of this session, we will create two integrations. That first will be app driven and the second will be schedule. And yes, we will discuss about that when we need to choose which what kind of integration pattern while creating the integration. And I will navigate you to basic elements of the Oracle integration, just like staging operation or the looping or adding the if else condition variables, all these things from where we can create. So just basic overview we will discuss on this session. So let's begin with the web services. So whenever we are saying that web services, something that the services which is going to help us to communicate with two different systems. So for example, we have to create the transaction in Oracle Fusion. So Oracle Fusion directly not going to be allow us to insert data into the table. So whenever we are saying that we have to create transaction in Oracle Fusion, it means that whatever transaction we are going to create in Fusion, so for each and every transaction, they have the table. And if we have data in that specific table, the data will be reflected in front end, or you can say UI page. So creating transaction, it means our main purpose is to inserting data into that specific table so that the same data can be visible on the front end. So Oracle or any third party system is not going to allow us directly to insert data in their database or a specific table. That's why they created web services. Web services is something that the application available over cloud so that we can use that application, whatever transaction we want to perform based on transaction specific API, we have to pass this data, and that API or web services will perform the operations. What kind of operation we are going to perform, they will perform. So suppose we have to create AP invoices, we have REST API to create AP invoices, and that API we will pass data to that API, and that the API will create transaction in the Fusion. And whenever we are saying that create transaction in Fusion, it will insert data into that specific table. Just like for AP invoices, we have table AP invoices all like and AP invoice lines also. So we cannot directly insert data into the table. So with the help of that API, we can perform the operations. So yes, whenever we are saying that web services, we have two types of web services, the SOAP and the REST. SOAP is known as that simple object access protocol, and the REST for representational state transfer. So what is difference between both? Why we are using that, and how we will choose that which is web services we have to use, everything we will done here. So here you can see we have basic differences between both. Like there is, yes, there are many more differences between say soap and rest. But yes, whenever we as a OIC developer is going to use, so we cannot specifically choose which API we have to use. That we have to use soap API or REST API. Why we cannot choose that one which we have to use? Because of that, with the help of API, we are going to create transaction. And yes, for each and every transaction, it means Oracle provided a specific web services. For example, creating purchase order in Oracle Fusion, we don't have REST API. So we don't have option to choose that which API or which web services we need to use to create purchase order. So in this case, Oracle provided SOAP API, SOAP web services to create the AP invoice to create the purchase order in Oracle Fusion. So same as for creating the AP invoices, Oracle provided REST API to create AP invoices in Fusion, and we don't have SOAP for that. So yes, whenever we are saying that we have to create AP invoices in Fusion with the help of web services, we will use REST services available for that specific transaction. So yes, Oracle provided various APIs to create different transactions. We will learn that from where we can identify where we will get the API, what is the details of API, what kind of request payload, response payload of that API, everything we will learn. So here, whenever we are saying that request payload and response payload, so yes, while creating the integration or working on the integration, you will listen this payload every time. So whenever we are saying that payload is something like we are going to pass the value, right? We are calling the API, and whatever value we are passing to that API is called as payload. So the value we are passing to that API is called as request payload, and the value or the data that API is going to return back is known as response payload. So yes, we have slight differences between SOAP and REST API. So whenever we are saying that SOAP API, it's only accepting that XML format. And when we are saying that REST API, it can accept XML, JSON, and different formats. And in terms of security, yes, whenever we are using SOAP services, they have more security than the REST, and there are many differences. Yes, yes, Asim, want to say anything?
Yes, sir, for a
Yeah.
quick question. So,
Hmm.
what is the advantage of a web service over a file? Why don't we just create an integration based off of a file and not use web services?
Correct. So yeah. So Asim, file and the web service is completely different. Like whenever we are saying that file having the data, right? And how we can process that data in Fusion, that API will define that, right? With the help of that file, we can only get the data, but how we can process the data in Fusion, that's why we have web services. So not only we have web services, we have FDI approach, that file based import and export. So with the help of that app, also we can perform operation. But yes, for performing the operation, we require some operation. So what kind of operation it can be? That can be the SOAP, or that can be the REST. So there is no any relation between file and the web services. Both are different things. File having the data, and web services having the facilities or the capabilities to perform operation based on the data we have in the file. So hope Asim it's clear, right? Anyone
Yes,
having the
yes.
data in the file and the web services? Yeah.
So, to
So you,
understand it further, Zafar,
yeah. Mhm.
so what you're saying is even if an integration is a file based, there are
Yeah.
still few aspects of the integration that use web service.
Exactly. So file doesn't giving us option to provide the create the transaction. File is something that we have data, right? So what kind of data, what kind of invoices or the purchase order or inventory transaction we are going to create, that file having the data or records inside that. But how we can perform the operation, operation will define by the SOAP or the REST API, or even we have the third option as FVDI.
As I've seen in real life experience
Hmm.
that if you use a web service, say for an example, an API invoice
Hmm.
interface, you
Correct.
don't need to have a file because the vendor itself will provide you a REST or SOAP. I think it's a link. I don't really remember. And using that link, the data will be transferred over. I think it's in JSON format, the one we
Correct.
use to
Correct.
the
So,
SOAP UI.
okay. So, what I'm saying here, Asim, is that whenever we are saying that file, it means, so, okay, let's example for creating the AP invoices, we have REST API, right? To calling the REST API, we need to pass some data. So from where you will get the data? We have two options for getting the data, even more than two options. For passing the data to API, we can directly pass as a hard-coded values to the request payload of that REST API, or we can get the data from database table, or we can get the data from the file present over SFTP server or somewhere else, right?
Okay.
So
Yes,
X,
that's right.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah. So that was the data which is available in the file you are talking about. There is no
okay.
any
I understand.
correlation between file and the web services. With the help
Understood.
of web
Understood.
services, we are going to perform the operation. For example, we have to create, we have data file. In the data file, we have 10 invoices record, and we have to create the invoices. Forget about web services. So we have the team is going to create AP invoices. So what we will do, we will pass the data file or the like whatever file we have, CSV file, text file, or any file to that team. That team will get the data from the file, and one by one it will enter from the front end, right? So that it can create the AP invoices. Right, the same operation whatever the operator is doing with the from the front end, we have to perform using the web services or perform using the Oracle integration. That's why we have API. First we will get the data from the data file, and then one by one, if we have 10 records in the data file, we will pass one by one to the web services so that the web services can create transaction in Fusion one by one, whatever data we will pass based on that. Okay, moving next, we have OIC edition. Yes, Oracle provided two editions, that standard and enterprise. So enterprise edition have all the facilities, all the features, whatever we have for the standard, and plus some additional features. For example, you can see enterprise when we are going to create Oracle integration instance with enterprise edition, we will have the process that we said at process cloud services PCS. We have enterprise adapters and various more, like we have file servers. So you can see that here in the visual you can easily identify that the whenever we are saying that visual builder, yes, if you are going to create Oracle instance with the edition of a standard or enterprise, you will have the facility of integration, visual builder, and the basic standard adapters like FTP or ATP, Oracle database, and that many more. Like here you can see for B2B, we don't have, when we are going to create Oracle instance with that the standard edition, we don't have B2P option for that. The same as we have for the process PCS and many more. Like so, the next point we are going to discuss about the adapters. So, as we know that whenever we require to make a connectivity with any third-party system, we need to first identify what kind of third-party system we are going to connect. So that's why adapter comes in picture. Adapter will define that which third-party system we are going to connect. That third-party system can be the REST services, third-party system can be the SOAP services, or it can be the file server, it can be the Oracle database, MySQL, or anything. So that system we are going to connect, that adapter will define that which system we are going to connect. So in Oracle integration instance, they provided various adapters so that we can use that adapters in Oracle integration. So we will move and we will learn one by one adapters. So yes, here we are done with adapters. Now let's move to the connection part. So here you can see in the Oracle integration homepage right now we have, and once we will move to the integration side, as we have to create integration only. So we'll move here in the integration, and in the integration you can see these all are the components whatever we have in the Oracle integration. So whenever we are saying that adapters, so you can see there are many adapters available in the in Oracle integration. So whenever you are going to create instance, all the adapters are automatically loaded here, and you can use that all the adapters uh, while creating the connections. So that you can see that there are various various adapter available here, and all the adapters we will use in connection, so that that connection will know about that. Okay, which third party system we are going to connect. And now, if we move to the connection part, so before going to create integration, we require connection, because that connection will identify that which system we have to make a connectivity, so that the same we can implement in Oracle integration. So here you can see I have already created few connections, and once we need to create new connections, once I will click on this create icon, you can see the first option we are getting is to select the adapters. So that what I told you, connection will identify that we are going to make a connectivity with third party system. But which third party system we are going to make a connectivity, it will be defined by the adapters only. So here, if we want to create the REST connection, we will select REST here. If we want to create the SOAP connection, we will select SOAP. Even we can search, or by dragging down, you can choose the adapters, which adapters you have to select for the connections. So based on that, we can create the connection. So let's example, we have to create the REST connection. So we'll select REST here, and we'll click on the select. So once you will select here, you can see we have few options, the name and the identifier. So we can create various connection with the same name, but the identifier cannot be the same. For example, we are creating ESS job, or in EBS we are creating concurrent programs. So where we have option to provide the name and the short name. So name can be duplicate, or name can be the same as the previously created connections, but the short name cannot be same. So same as here we have identifier. If we have already created any connection with the same identifier, we cannot use that identifier while creating the another connection. And yes, we can have the multiple names for the connection. And here is the keyword. Keyword is nothing, that it's simply for the searching purpose. Suppose we created various connections and we want to search the connection based on a specific keyword we defined here. So that keyword will help you here to find your connection. And yes, whenever we are saying that the roles, if you will see, we discuss about that. We have three different roles to create the connection. That roles are the trigger, invoke, and trigger and invoke. So we have differences between all these types, or we can say roles of the connection, we will discuss here. So suppose we are going to create the connection, so let me give the name as xx. So here I am using xx, so that we can identify that okay, this connection we are going to create. But yes, when you will work on the project, this xx will be replaced by your project code. So, for example, you are going to work on like any project. Let's example, there is the client we have Jaguar, so they can be JAQ, or any other whatever naming convention they are going to use. They will provide you the naming convention. And yes, whenever you will create integration, you will create connection, you will follow that specific naming convention only, so that the any developer is going to work on, they can easily identify that connection or the integration whatever we have created. So here's I'm going to give the name as xx rest connection rest 01. So yes, here you can see we given the name, that whenever we are providing the name while creating the connection, identifier automatically added. But yes, we can change the identifier values. Even if we can remove from 0 from here, we can give the name whatever we want. So it's not mandatory that whatever by default name identifier coming from the name we need to use. No, we can change. And yes, here you can see we have roles. So as I told you that whenever we are saying that roles of connection, you can, for understanding purpose, we can consider as a type of connection also. But actually the type will define the adapters. So whatever adapter we are going to use to create the connection, that connection type will be considered same as. For example, for creating this connection, we use REST adapters. So this connection will be called as the REST type connection. And yes, role is here. While creating the connection, we need to select this role. If we selected any types of role here, we cannot change this role later on after creation. So what's the difference between all these roles? So the first one is trigger. So whenever we are saying that trigger connections, we create a trigger connection. It means that that connection will be used only while initiating the integration. or we can say the while using starting the integration. This trigger role type connection cannot be used anywhere in integration instead of using the first endpoint of the integration. We will see each and every one. So here instead of 01, I will use trigger so that we can identify the same in integration only. Here let me use trg defined for trigger. And yes, second we have invoke. So whenever we are saying that invoke, for example, we created integration, and that integration we have to call the REST services to perform the transaction, to create the AP invoices. So in this case, what we are going to do is that we are going to invoke the third party system, third party APIs, which is REST API. In this case, we cannot use trigger. As I told you, trigger role type connection can be used only in a starting of the integration. Once we will move to the integration creation part, we will see there also. And whenever we are saying that invoke will never be used in a starting of the integration. Invoke role type in connection will only be used in mid of the integration or last of the integration, so that it can call the, or it can invoke the different system, we can say the web services. And yes, last we have trigger and invoke. So when we are creating connection by selecting the trigger and invoke, it means that that connection having the properties of trigger and invoke, it means that a specific connection can be used in starting of the integration, or it can be used anywhere in the integration. So yes, whenever we have the bit confusion about that, this connection we can use to initiate the integration, or this connection we can use while calling any different system or different web services, yes, we will select trigger and invoke in that case. Yes, Asim, want to ask anything?
Yes, so
Yeah.
with invoke, can we not use SOAP web service or is it only for REST?
Yes, there is few adapters. That adapter is not going to allow to use as a trigger. So yes, when we will create the integration, we will see that one also. Yes, we have for soap. So but yeah, there are various adapters. That adapter doesn't have facilities to use as a trigger. So we will see that one later. So first, I will create the connection and I will show you what is the difference between that and how we will identify the connection. So here I am going to create connection as a role trigger. So let me just create here. I will use the same name. So here you can see as this REST connection we created as a trigger. It means this connection can be used only while initiating the integration or starting of the integration. So why I am saying that initiating the integration, I will explain when we will move to the integration creation part. Right. So here you can see for the security we have by default that or 2.0, or you can see select basic authentication. So I just don't want to change anything. Whatever we have, I will let it be same so that I can configure the this endpoint in this connection in our integration. So once you will save, you can see a status will be changed to configure. Until your connection station will be changed to configure, you cannot use this connection in your integration. So once it's done, we will test and save and go back. So here we created connection, and you can see here the connection role is trigger. It's reflecting here for the identification purpose. So let me create another integration connection. We'll use the same REST type. And here instead of trigger, I will use invoke type. And yes, once we will move to the create, here you can see when we created connection type as a trigger for host, we don't have any option to provide the credentials like providing the user ID, password, URL and all. But yes, when we selected the invoke type, we have option to provide the connection type credentials. So why we are getting that kind of things? So as I told you that whenever we are saying that we created invoke type connection, it means that that connection is going to help to call any third party system, right? That with the help of that REST connection, we are going to call the REST services. That's why while creating the REST connection as a invoke, we need to provide the connection URL, that which system we are going to connect, and the connection type, that it is REST based URL, and the basic details that the what is the authenticated user to call that services. So for example, we have REST API. I will just show you that how we will identify that what URL we have to provide here while calling the creating the connection for calling the third party system. So here you can see this is the URI for creating the AP invoices, and here we have to provide the connection URL. So that connection URL will be the third party system name where we are going to perform the transaction. So where we can say that whenever we are going to create the AP invoices, we are going to create the AP invoices in Fusion instance, right? So here you can see for that we have the Oracle Fusion instance. In this Fusion instance only we are going to create the AP invoices. So how we will complete this URL, right? Complete this URL to create the transaction. So we will copy this one, copy URL, and whatever we have this URI, we will copy this URI. So this will be the complete URL to create the AP invoices. Right, this will be the complete URL to create the AP invoices. The same URL, even we can use the Postman for testing purpose and all these things. The same we need to use here while creating the connection. So what you can see, when we are going to create the connection, we don't require to provide all these details. Means we don't require to provide this one. This URI we can provide while configuring the connection in Oracle integration. So what we need to provide here, we need to just provide the URL of that the host, or we can see the third party system in which we are going to perform the transaction. So here we are going to perform the transaction in this Fusion instance. So I will copy this one and we need to provide this one here. And here you can see when we are saying that the authentication, we need to pass the username and password. So what will be the username and password here? So whatever username and password we are going to log into the Fusion instance, the same user and password we need to pass here. And it is mandatory to have this user, whatever user we are going, this user to perform the transaction in Fusion, the specific transaction. So if we provided the user Fusion user here, and we this user doesn't have operation, have the roles or the privileges to perform the transaction in Fusion, this connection cannot be performed the transaction or cannot create the AP invoices in Fusion. So here let me provide the details. Let me test here. So you can see right now the status is in draft. So we tested, and once we will save, it will be changed to configure. And once we say that connection is in configure status, that connection is ready to use in Oracle integration. So here we will move to the next. We created two connections. The first connection we created as a trigger role. Second connection created we created as invoke role. And now next connection we will create as trigger and invoke. We will create a SOAP connection also, but right now we will not create while calling the BI reports or calling the any SOAP services. At the time we will create the SOAP connection as well. So here we are going to select connection type as a role type as a trigger and invoke. Here I will use, here you can see we'll use RG invoke. And now we are going to create. So here again you can see once we created connection select by selecting the role as invoke the trigger, we don't have option to provide the credentials. When we selected connection role type as a trigger invoke, we have option to provide the URL and all. And again we select, when we selected the role as a trigger and invoke, again we have same option, whatever option we have as a trigger, as a invoke. So why we are getting option, why we are getting option for provide the URL or provide the user ID password for the system? Because as I told you that the role type trigger and invoke will work as a same as the invoke, and it will also work as a trigger. That's why we have for trigger we don't require any URL or the configuration user. But yes, for a invoke part we require that credentials for calling the third party system or accessing the third party system. That's why when we selected the trigger and invoke role, we have to provide all the details. So again I will use same details here. So as this is rest based, so I will select here, and we need to provide the user ID and password. Now I will just test. So you can see once we done the testing, you can see the status is 100%, but now the status of this connection is in draft mode only. So once it's moved to the 100%, then only we can go for save. And once we will save, that will be configured, and the same we can use in Oracle integration. So we are done with the creation of the creation of the connections. We will move to the integration creation part. So before going to create the integration, the very basic logic is that whenever we are saying that we are going to create the create the integration, so we have option to create integration with selecting the different pattern. So here you can see whenever we are moving to the integration part and going to create the integration, here we have to select the different patterns for the integration. So the most of the patterns we will use that can be the app driven or schedule. So there is differences between both app driven and schedule. So whenever we require, sometimes like we require one, we need to create one integration. That integration will be activated or will be like running at a specific time, at a specific date, or any specific interval. It can it automatically run on a specific time. That at the time we will create integration as a schedule integration. And yes, whenever we require, we need to run the integration from any third party system. We need to run the integration manually by triggering or moving to the manually running the integration. At the time we will select app driven. But yes, when I use the term we can run the integration from any third party system, it means that we are going to expose our integration as a API. So that API can be the REST API, that API can be the SOAP API. So here in the term of creating app-driven integration by selecting the REST API, REST connection, it means that we are going to create a REST API. So I will explain you, or once we will create the integration, I will show you that how why we are saying that when we created any app-driven integration by selecting the REST API, that is going to treat as a REST API. So I will explain that one also. So here, let me first create the schedule orchestration integration, and we'll see the differences between schedule and app driven. So here I'm going to select the integration style as a schedule, and by clicking select, we will have option to provide the name and the details for that integration. So again, here you can see while creating the integration, we have to provide the name and identifier. This name as identifier concept is same as we discussed while creating the connection, that name can be different. See, name can be same while creating the integration, but the identifier cannot be same. Identifier will always be unique on a specific instance. And yes, after that we have version. So we have three different version: major, minor, and patch. Yes, when we will move to the creating the clone of that integration, we will discuss about that the version also, that why we will select which version and all the details. And yeah, yes, after that we have document URL. It's you can provide the document URL as the same URL here we are using for that Oracle instance, or it's not mandatory to provide. Only the mandatory part we have is to three: version, identifier, and name. Then the keyword is the same. It will help us to find or search the integration. And yes, after that package. So as we already discussed that whenever we are going to create the package or provide the package to the integration, that integration is going to combine with the specific package only. So here you can see once we click here, we have few of predefined packages. So these packages, it means that we have already created integration, and that integration having attached with this package. That's why this package is listed here. So suppose we are going to create a new package, something like that test. So this test already, this package name as test isn't available in the system. So once we will write here test, what it will do, it will first check this test package. Is that test package available in the system or not? If this is available, then what it will do, this integration will be merged with this package. If this test is not available in the system, it will create new test package, and the integration will be mapped with this package only. Here we have description. So this is the best practice. Whenever you are going to create integration, just use the description to just brief about the integration, what the integration is going to do, and what kind of the operation performing using the integration. That kind of things we can provide here. So let me create the integration first. So here, while creating the integration, we will provide the name. So I will use same naming convention, XX. You can use whatever you want to create, and this XX will be replaced by your project code while working on the project. And I will give the name XX. This is schedule integration, so I will use SC for identifying the schedule integration 01. You can use different name, whatever you want. And here again, we have the identifier. We can replace the identifier. We can change the identifier. But yes, whenever we are providing the name, identifier by default coming, it's suggested identifier. We can replace this identifier also. This is the version. So by default, whenever we are going to create integrations, the major version created by 01 and rest of the things 0. So whenever we are going to migrate this integration to the different instance, then after migration we need to do some changes. We are going to create the clone of that, and once whenever we are going to create clone, that the patch one version is going to change. So all these things we will discuss in depth. So now we are going to click on this create icon. So once we will click on the create icon, it will create the integration, and we can see the integration canvas where we can design our operations. So here you can see whenever we created schedule integration, we have default two endpoint. Remember in Oracle integration, whenever we are saying that endpoint, so whatever element, whatever component we added in the integration canvas, that will be considered as an endpoint. So here we have this scheduler, this is the scheduler, and this is also known as endpoint. Endpoint doesn't mean that the last point, right? The last element. No, endpoint, whatever element we have added here, that is known as the endpoint. We are generally using this term. So whenever we are creating schedule integration, we have default two endpoints. The first endpoint is the scheduler, and the second endpoint is the stop. So here you can see with the help of this scheduler endpoint only, this integration going to start. So if you are aware about the programming, like we are using Java programming, C, C++, any programming. For starting of the program, we required the main function, right? So you can see the start is the main function, which is going to start this integration. And this is the schedule endpoint. Even we can use the parameter here, everything we will learn in the day. So yes, we created the app schedule integration, and we see that whenever we are going to create schedule integration, what kind of element we are going to use, we are getting the endpoint everything. Now we are going to create one app driven integration, and we'll see when we are creating app driven integration what kind of endpoint or elements we are getting by default. So again, for creating the integration, we will move to the integration part. In integration, and here you can see we have to click on create. Here we'll create on the click. Yeah. Are not getting option. Let me check again. Moving to the integration part again. Let me back. So here you can see once we will move to the integration part, if we want to save, yes, we can click on the save, so that whatever endpoint or whatever endpoint or components we added, that can be saved. For moving to the back to the integration homepage, we can close here so that we can move back to the integration. So here, yes, we have different status of the integration. We will discuss that status also. So right now you can see this integration status is in draft mode. So whatever integration we have in the draft mode, we cannot activate this integration. We will discuss that also. So here just I am clicking on the create button so that we can create another integration. So here this previously we created schedule integration. Now we are going to create app driven integration. So here I will select app driven orchestration, click on select, and now we have to provide the name. So I will use name at XX as it is app driven. So I will use AP integration 01. Now close, create. I don't want to provide the package name. So click here. So here you can see the app driven integration is created. So previously, if you will see when we created the schedule integration, here let me open the schedule integration. Don't worry about that. I will explain everything, that how we can unlock and how we can lock the integration. Everything we will discuss. Right. So just let me open this one. Schedule one. Yes, we have to open the schedule one. So here you can see when we created schedule integration, we by default we got two endpoint. The first endpoint is the scheduler, second endpoint is the stop. And was when we created the app-driven integration, we don't have any endpoint here. So why we don't have any endpoint here? Because in the scheduler, it fixed that we are going to schedule the integration on a specific time, and on the specific time, it will automatically execute. That's why with the help of this scheduler only, we can schedule the integration, and this integration will be executed with the help of this scheduler only. But in app driven, we don't have such kind of things. We don't have any scheduler. In the app driven, we are going to initiate the integration, or we are going to run the integration whenever we required. We required running the integration from any third party system or by manually moving to the integration page, that kind of things. So that's why we have to provide the endpoint so that that endpoint can help this integration to initiate or the start. So that's why most of the time we are using schedule, we are using REST connection to initiate the integration, to start the integration. That's why whenever we are using REST connection to initiate the integration, that integration can be exposed as a REST API. So here you can see this is the integration canvas page. In the canvas page right now we don't have anything. You can see a start and end is empty. We don't have anything, but in the schedule we have these two. The stop is saying that here we are going to end the integration. We don't have anything after that. But here we don't have anything. So yes, we have to add. For adding that one, the first part we need to add is the connection so that that integration can initiate. So what connection we are going to use? We are going to use REST connection. So why we will use REST connection? Everything we will discuss in details later on when we will create integration one by one. So here for adding the connection, in the right side, you can see we have one option. The option name is trigger. You can see. Are you able to see that triggers one? Triggers one, I told you that whenever we are going to create connection, at the time of creating connection, we have different roles. So once I will click here, you can see these all are the adapters, and based on that adapters, we created the connections. So once we will click on the each and every adapters, you can see we have different connections created. So here you can see we created SOAP connection. This connection earlier I have created. So the REST connection, you can see, if you remember these two connection we created, that XX REST connection test TRG for the trigger, XX REST connection test TRG INV. It means that trigger and invoke. But here you can see we are not able to see the invoke one, right? But we created the invoke role type connection as well, right? But we are not able to see. Why we are not able to see the invoke type? Because this is the integration, and this integration is not going to start right now. As I told you that invoke role type connection can be used only the in mid of the integration to calling the third party system. And right now here in the integration, we don't have any endpoint to initiate or start or the trigger point of the integration. That's why the integration suggested that app-driven integration suggested that first add the trigger type connection, then only I will allow you to add different types of connection. So here you can see the name of this endpoint here is the triggers, and the same if you will move to the schedule endpoint. So as this schedule endpoint have already the trigger node, trigger endpoint as a scheduler, that's why if you will move here and you can see invoke, we don't have trigger option here because I told you that in our integration only we have one trigger node, trigger connection, and once we added the trigger connection, we cannot use trigger role type connection in Oracle integration in mid of the integration. The trigger type connection can be used only in the starting of the integration. Remember, trigger role type connection can be used only in the starting of the integration. Except the starting, we cannot use anywhere in the integration to that connection. That's why here if you will see, once I will click here, we will not have any trigger type connection here. You can see if you remember that XX REST connection test INV, this is the invoke type. So this one I created previously, but yes, this one here you can see XX REST connection test TRGINV. This is trigger and invoke type. And I told you that whenever we are selecting role as a trigger and invoke, that connection can be used anywhere. That connection can be used in a starting also, or that connection can be used in the mid of the integration also to invoke. So here you can see this INV is selected, we selected as an invoke type. And yes, I told you that invoke role type connection cannot be used in the starting of the integration or making the trigger of that integration. That's why this connection you will not find here, because here we required only trigger type connection, trigger role type connection, trigger role type or triggered and invoke role type. That's why you can see once we will click here, you can see we have only trigger type or trigger and invoke type connection created. You can see this is trg for trigger, trginv for invoke. And here, as we have already added by default the trigger endpoint, that's why we don't have trigger endpoint here. We have all these invoke endpoint, you can see. So all the connection created is the invoke type or triggered and invoke type. So here you can see in the app-driven integration, once I will drag this triggered type connection here, this trigger option will be removed, and instead of the trigger, again we will have the same as invoke type. So let me show you the same. So here I am going to drag the test connections. Yes, for adding the endpoint in Oracle integration canvas page, we have two options. The first option is that whenever you will move the cursor, you can see the plus icon. You can click on the plus icon by typing or by selecting here, you can select. And the second option, and the better option, is that you can move to the right side of the taskbar, click on the specific action or the trigger or invoke, whatever you want, select the connection and direct the connection to a specific point whenever you want to map. So here you can see we have this the trigger one, XX REST connection trg. I will drag this trigger here, and here we have to provide the details. So whenever we are adding the REST endpoint as a trigger, we will get some few options, and all these things we will discuss here. You can see here we have first we need to provide the name to the endpoint. Each and every endpoint having the name. For example, here you can see this is the schedule endpoint, that is scheduler, and this scheduler name having the schedule. The same as we have to provide the name here to this REST endpoint. So whenever we are going to give to the name to the any endpoint, we always follow the convention. What convention we will follow? It's not mandatory, but yeah, it's best practice. Whenever you create the integration, we provide the any endpoint to the integration or any element you providing to the integration canvas page, you need to follow the convention. The best practice for the convention is that first use the operation, what kind of operation that endpoint is going to perform. Then you need to give the name to that endpoint. What is the name of that endpoint? So here this endpoint, I told you that this is the trigger endpoint, and this, with the help of this endpoint only, we are going to initiate the integration or start the integration. The same as this scheduler is going to start the integration here, the same as this REST connection is going to help to start the integration. That's why I will use a start. I always use best practice as a start here. Instead of a start, you can use trigger also. So here I will suggest to use a start. I will use a start. You can use whatever you want. After that, this is the operation we are going to perform with the help of this endpoint. And then we need to provide the endpoint type or name. So this is the REST endpoint. So I will use REST here. So start underscore REST, so that after your development, suppose you develop the integration and after that another developer is coming and he is working on that integration. So whenever they will see the name, they can get to know about that. Okay, this endpoint is going to start the integration, and this endpoint is the type of REST. They no need to move and check that what kind of REST point it is. Even while running the integration, if you will move to the logger part, in logger it's not visible that what kind of endpoint it is. But yes, if you will provide the name, it will be easy to identify that okay, what kind of endpoint it is and what kind of operation this endpoint is going to perform. So here we selected the name. Once you will click on next, uh, let me drag this again. Start rest. Next, here you can see next we have to configure the details. So configure the details, it means that you can see what is the endpoint relative URI for this URL. As I told you that whenever we are going to create integration by adding the REST connection as a trigger, we are exposing the integration as a REST API. So here you can see for creating the AP invoices in Fusion, we have REST API, and that API URI is this one. This is the API URI. So this is the same here we have to provide while creating the integration so that the integration can be exposed as a REST API. So here we have to provide URI. I will explain that URI parameters, everything later on. So here I have to provide URI by providing the slash and the name. So here you can see in the URI, this is the invoices defining that we are going to perform operation on invoices. So the same as we will provide here slash test, right? You can use different things based on different operations. And yes, here we have the method. You can see we have different methods. So as you are aware about that, in the rest we have different method. That method as get, put, post, delete, and patch. So we will select right now. We can select different method for this API. So as I told you that here you can see for creating the API invoices, we have method as a post. So that it means that with the help of this post REST API, we are going to insert the data or we are going to perform the transaction. So same as here we can select the method. So this whenever we are saying that we are configuring the REST endpoint, it means that we are not going to use that REST endpoint in our integration. We are going to whenever we are going to expose this integration as a REST API. So the user who will use this API, that user what kind of method it will show. That's why here we have to select that one. So right now I don't want to change this get to post or anything. I will discuss that why we will select post and all. And yes, here you can see we have different options. We have option to configure this endpoint to receive the response, to pass the request payload, to add the parameters. Everything we will discuss later on once we will move to the integration creation part. So we'll click on next. I don't want to configure anything as a request or response payload. So as we have not selected anything here. Once we click on the next, it directly moves to the summary part. And in the summary, we have the basic details that whatever we have added and all. So we selected method as a get and the URI as a test. And now done. So once you will click on done, here you can see we have the endpoint. We have the endpoint. The first endpoint is the REST. Second endpoint is the mapper of that one. This is the mapper. I will explain what's the mapper and why we are using that mapper. And here you can see this is the last endpoint as a return. So this last endpoint as a return is defining that we have to return something. But here in the endpoint, we have not added anything. Let me open the integration again. So here, let me add the endpoint. Sometimes in Oracle instance, it's probably like creating problem while adding the endpoint and providing the configuration to that. So here I will drag the details again. Just give me name as start rest. And yes, here you can see in this endpoint we given the name as start rest, and the same name we cannot provide to different endpoint in the specific integration. So this is another validation here. I will use as test, next, and done. So here you can see we have the three endpoint. The first is the endpoint. In this endpoint, this is the endpoint is going to initiate the integration as run the integration, the same as we have the scheduler. And yes, here in the scheduler we have the stop, so that this integration is not going to return anything. But in the whenever we are selecting the REST endpoint, so yes, we can have option to provide the request and response payload. So here we have the mapper. With the help of this mapper only, we can provide the mapping values to the mapper so that it can return the values. And yes, this is the return endpoint define that we are going to return something to the integration. So we will discuss later on everything. So here you can see once we added the trigger endpoint, right? Here you can see in the REST endpoint, in the schedule integration, we have already added the trigger endpoint as a default. So once we already get the trigger endpoint, you can see we have the invoke connection available here. And yes, if you will see previously, if remember before adding this trigger one, we have for trigger, but now as we added trigger endpoint here, and as I told you that in our integration, we cannot have more than one trigger endpoint. So once we added the trigger, we don't have option for trigger and we have option for invoke connection. You can see once we click here, you can see we have only invoke and trigger and invoke role type connection here. Previously we having only the trigger type connection here, But now you can see we have the invoke and the trigger and invoke type connection here. You can see this is the same, and in the schedule also we have the same, because in the both integration right now we added the endpoint. So here I'm going to save this integration here so that later on we can use. So now here, so here you can see right now whatever element we added, this element is showing in the vertical way. So in the integration canvas, we can change this vertical to horizontal by selecting layout. Here you can see we have the layout option. Once you will move to here, you have option to select horizontal. So once you will select horizontal, it will be moved to the line by line as a horizontal. And the again same we have here vertical. So once we will click reset. So this reset is for that whatever mistake or whatever changes we have done in the canvas page. So suppose here we done the changes by moving the endpoint here and there, and now we want to arrange this endpoint. We will click on the reset so that it will align the all the endpoint in the specific way. So now same here, once we click on the reset, so as it was vertical, so it's showing here. Now we have to change to the horizontal. So we'll click here and it will be changed to horizontal. So we successfully created two integration. That the first is the schedule one and second was the app driven. And let me just print the log message to the integration only. So for adding the log message, what we need to do, we have the logger. So here you can see once you will click on the actions, in the action we have various elements. We will discuss this all the element one by one in next session. So for just we have to add the logger here. So what we will do, we have logger option here. You can see this is the logger. We have logger, we have note. We will discuss everything like what's the note and the logger. So right now we will use logger only. So I will drag this logger here so that we can add the log message. So here each and every time I told you that whenever we are going to add any endpoint, we have to provide the name. So as this is going to print the message, so I will use message underscore logger. Message is the operation we are going to perform or showing that one, and logger is the endpoint name. Now click on create. So while adding the logger, we will have few options. I will discuss on that the option also. So the option you can see we have the log as always and when trace is enabled. When we will move to the specific element, we will discuss on this one also. So right now I will select always, and here we have to provide the logger message. What kind of message we want to print or we want to show in the log message. So I will give the name something like hi, this is first. We can provide this message dynamically. Everything I will explain when we will move to the endpoint. So just for testing purpose, right now we are creating first integration. So I don't want to add much changes here. So once we validated move, and here you can see we added this endpoint successfully, and now it's time to save and run the integration. So here you can see once we click on the save, we don't have configuration option. Once our integration will be configured, then only we can activate the integration. So here you can see we have one error showing here. Once you will click here, it will show you the error details. The first way to identify the error or check the error. The second way is that you can directly click here. You can see the error icon. Once you will click all the error, you can see here. So what is the error? Remember this point. Whenever we are going to create integration, that integration can be app driven or schedule. It is mandatory to provide a business identifier or tracking variable to that integration. It is mandatory to provide the tracking variable or business identifier to each and every integration. So how we can provide that one? So by clicking here, you can see once you will click on the action, we have option for tracking. Once you will click on the tracking, you will see that three field here. So minimum one tracking variable is mandatory, and max to max three tracking variable we can add. So by adding the tracking variable, this is the name of the tracking variable, but value, what kind of field that tracking variable is going to hold, you can map from the left side. So that value can be the request payload, that value can be the parameters if you added, or if you don't have anything, yes, you can select by any of these things. So I will select as a method. I will drag this method here. So here once you will drag, you can see this method is mapped here, and here you can see this is the name. You can replace this name. You cannot change this one because this is the same variable we added here as a method, and here you can change the name as I can provide the method. And yes, this is the tracking variable. Now click on save. Once we will save and cancel here, you can see that error will be removed by default. When we will create the integration later on, we will explain each and every point that how we will identify the request and the response payload, why we will pass the request and response payload, everything. So here you can see once we added the tracking variable, error got resolved. Now we can save the integration, and by closing, we will be able to activate the integration. So here you can see the integration XX AP integration 01, that is the app driven schedule type. And yes, you can see we have a status of this integration is in configured. Now we can activate. For activating this integration, we have to click on this power icon. And yes, I will select tracking here. These two I will explain in the next session. So just I will click on activate. It will take a little bit of time to activate based on the element, based on the operation we are going to perform inside that. So right now we are not going to perform much operation, so it will activate now. Just need to refresh here. You can see it's activated. For running the integration, you need to click on this run icon, and here you need to click on the test button. So once you will click here, the integration will be ready to run. The and for running the integration, we need to click on this test. As this is the app driven, that's why once we will click on the test, this integration will be executed. Here we have various things like header, body, all these things. This is the response we will discuss later on. So once you will click here, you can say integration activated, and this is the log message. Thus log message of the integration. And remember, when you run the integration, after the completing of the integration, completion of the integration, it will take little bit of time to load the log messages. So right now you can see we don't have any hyperlink to see the log message. So after a few times, a few minutes, a second, once we reload again, you can see we have the hyperlink to see the messages. Right. So here you can see in the integration, we added the start rest endpoint to initiate the integration. And you can see this start rest as a trigger. And here you can see what kind of message this start rest has. So whatever configuration we have done, that configuration having this start rest. So once you will click on the message, you can see the method at get we selected while configuring the rest endpoint, and the URI. This is the URI. If you remember, in the last we added as test. If you remember, this is the complete URL for the integration, and this is the URI. And here you can see the relative URI. You can see the test we added and the path. So this is the path for that our integration. So all these basic details we have here. And after that, adding the REST connection for initiating the integration as a trigger, we added the logger. So you can see that this is the logger, and what's the name we provided? We provided name as message underscore logger. And what kind of value we added in the logger to display? We added the value to logger. You can see log message is hi. This is the first app driven integration. So this is the log message we added, right? So this is the way we can create app driven integration, and we can run the integration. Now it's time to for schedule integration. So here you can see this is our schedule integration. In schedule integration, we have by default scheduler, and this is the end endpoint. And now again, if we want to show the log message, print the log messages, what we will do, on the action button, we will move to the move it. We will drag this logger here. So as I told you, for dragging for or adding the element in the canvas page, we have two options. The first option, we can directly drag and drop. And the second option, we can move to the integration canvas, and where we need to add the mapper, at the endpoint, we will move our cursor there. And you can see once I move the cursor here, we have the plus icon. Once you will click here, you can see all the connection, all the endpoint, whatever we want to add here. So I want to add the logger. I will search logger here. You can see once I will click here, the logger will be added here. We need to provide the name. So again, I will select as message underscore logger create. Here I will select always. What is the differences between always and when trace is enabled? I will explain. I will everything. So now here we have to provide the value. So I will again provide the value. Hi, this is our first schedule integration. So now I will click on the validate, so that if this message is perfectly fine, it will show the expression as validated. And now close. So you can see we successfully added the logger endpoint to display the log message. And again, we have one error. As I told you that for each and every integration, it is mandatory to have a minimum one tracing variable, max to max three. So again, here we have to add the tracing variable. We will just click on the tracking, and here you can see in the rest, when we created the rest endpoint, we have as a tracking variable, we have the start rest endpoint, and there we will have option that one. You can see the method, URI, and that the relative URL, all these things. The same and for the schedule endpoint, we have only one thing, that is a start time. So I will drag this start time here, and here even we can change the name, the tracking variable. So instead of a start time, I just want to make that time. Click on save. Why we are using tracking variable, everything we will discuss later on. So as we are like ending with the time, so just I will click on the close. You can see once we added the tracking variable, error got resolved. Now we save, and here you can see the message integration, this one was saved successfully and ready for activation. Once we will get this message, then only we can activate the integration. So we'll cancel. And here you can see this is the integration homepage. Here this is our schedule integration. It's in new, and you can see the status as configure. Again you can see the first one, status as configure. Now we have to activate. Again, for activating the integration, we have to click on this power button, and here we have to click on this activate. So in the schedule one, we have in the app driven, we have option for tests. Here we have the activate. So for running the integration, executing this integration, again we have to click on this run icon, and here you can see in the app driven, we have option for test, but in the schedule we have submit. So whenever we are saying that running the schedule integration manually, it is considered as a running the schedule integration as a ad hoc basis. Ad hoc basis by manually we are going to run the integration, right? So here once you will click on the submit, that integration will be submitted. So you can see the integration submitted, and it is generating the instance ID. So once we will click on this instance ID, it will show the log message. So here, this is a tracking field. I will discuss here in everything, like how we can identify the tracking message or all these things here. So here you can see it's earlier it was in progress. Now you can see this is succeed. So once succeeded, we can move to the log message by clicking on this eye icon. I will refresh again so that if it's need time, it can reload. Once we will click on the eye icon to check the log message, you can see here. This is the first endpoint as the schedule. You can see schedule request start running, and you can see triggered a schedule run with message. So you can see this was the endpoint, and in the endpoint we can see we have only a start time. This is the time, and the same start time we map in the tracking variable. So here you can see, if I will click here, you can see in the tracking variable we given the name as time. So this is the name of the tracking variable, and the value we map as a time. So you can see this is the value. I will explain later on here. So now you can see once we will move to the logger, you can see we added the logger message underscore logger, and the logger having the message, hi, this is our first schedule integration. So this is the basic way to create the integration. In next session, we will move to the deep, that how we can create a request and response pillar to the app-driven integration, how we can add the parameters to the schedule integration. Everything we will learn in the next session. So thank you so much for watching. If you have any other queries and you want to ask anything, like the platform is now open to ask your queries. So I will be happy to see query from your side. If you have any other queries, you can just unmute yourself and you can ask. So are we good? Can we close, or anyone having any queries or want to ask? So
My
yeah,
emotion set.
yeah. Want to say something?
Yeah. Do you give us any instances for practice purpose?
No, right now we are not providing the instances, but yes, later on in the future when we will plan next session, for sure we will provide the instance for the Fusion and the OIC instance both. But for this 2 week session, we don't have option for instance, so we are not going to provide instance this time.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much. We will meet in next session. Thank you so much again.